Olivia Taylor clutched her sleeping twins to her chest as the stagecoach rumbled into Clearwater Springs, Colorado, a dusty speck of civilization carved into the untamed frontier of 1873. Exhaustion and desperation etched deep lines around her eyes, making her appear older than her 22 years. Her husband's grave was 300 miles behind her, along with everything else she had ever known. "End of the line, madam," the driver called gruffly, not bothering to help her down as he might have done for other passengers. Olivia stepped carefully onto the wooden platform of the stagecoach station, the warm June sun beating down on her faded blue bonnet. The twins stirred against her, little Samuel and Sarah, just 4 months old and already orphaned of their father. Tiny wisps of dark hair peeked from beneath their swaddling cloths. "You got someone meeting you?" the station manager asked, eyeing her dusty traveling dress and the 2 infants with obvious concern. "I have a letter," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "For Mr. James Wellington. He's my late husband's uncle." The station manager's face fell. "James Wellington passed on last winter, madam. Pneumonia took him quick." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her last hope vanished. The little money she had would barely secure a room for a week, let alone provide for her babies until she could establish herself. Is there a hotel? Somewhere I could stay while I make arrangements?" she asked. "There's Widow Cooper's boarding house," he said hesitantly. "But she don't much care for little ones. Makes too much noise for her liking." "I have no choice," Olivia replied, squaring her shoulders. "Which direction?" 3 days later, Olivia sat on the edge of her narrow bed at Widow Cooper's, counting the few coins remaining in her purse. The widow had reluctantly allowed her to stay, but the constant scowls whenever the twins cried made it clear her welcome was wearing thinner by the hour. She had inquired throughout the small town for work, but the responses were always the same. "Can't hire a woman with 2 babies," the shopkeeper had said. "What would you do with those little ones while you're serving tables?" asked the saloon owner, not unkindly. "The school already has a teacher," the mayor's wife informed her. "No one wants a seamstress who will be interrupted every few minutes by crying infants," the dressmaker explained. Olivia wiped away a tear. She had been reduced to begging for work, any work, and still no one would have her. Not with the twins. Some had suggested the orphanage in Denver, but the thought of giving up her babies was unbearable. They were all she had left of Thomas. A sharp knock at her door startled her. Widow Cooper stood in the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a hard line. "Miss Taylor, I'm afraid I must ask you to make other arrangements by tomorrow. Mrs. Hollister from down the street has complained about the crying again, and I simply cannot." "But where am I to go?" Olivia interrupted, desperation creeping into her voice. The widow shrugged, not without sympathy but firm nonetheless. "Perhaps the church might help. Reverend Simmons sometimes takes in those in need." Olivia nodded numbly. She would try the church in the morning, though she had little hope. She had already spoken with the Reverend's wife, who had made it clear that, with 5 children of their own, they had no room for more. The next morning, Olivia stood in the town square, her belongings in one small trunk beside her, the twins bundled against her chest in a sling she had fashioned. The townsfolk hurried past, avoiding her eyes. A woman alone with 2 infants was an uncomfortable reminder of how precarious life on the frontier could be. "Miss Taylor," called a voice. She turned to see Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, approaching with a concerned expression. "I heard Widow Cooper asked you to leave. I wish I could offer you a place, but with our 6 children." "I understand," Olivia said softly. "The thing is," Mrs. Peterson continued awkwardly, "the town council met last night. They've taken up a collection to help you get to Denver." There's an orphanage there that would take the twins, and the sisters would surely help you find a position." "No," Olivia said firmly. "I thank you for your concern, but I will not abandon my children." Mrs. Peterson sighed. "Nobody wants to be cruel, Miss Taylor. But a young woman with twin babies and no husband, it's just not practical out here. You need to think of what's best for those little ones." "What's best is to stay with their mother," Olivia insisted, though her voice trembled, as Mrs. Peterson walked away, shaking her head. Olivia felt truly alone for the first time since Thomas's death. She had been too busy surviving to feel the full weight of her isolation until now. She sat on her trunk, cradling the twins, and considered her dwindling options. She could try to make it to Denver, but not to give up her children. Perhaps there were more opportunities in a larger city. But the journey would be expensive and dangerous for a woman traveling alone with infants. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A man on horseback was riding into town, his broad-shouldered figure silhouetted against the morning sun. He rode with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the saddle, guiding his horse with subtle movements. As he drew closer, she could see he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a brown Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He reined in his horse near the general store across the square and dismounted with fluid grace. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. He tied his horse to the hitching post and disappeared into the store. Olivia returned her attention to her babies. Sarah was beginning to fuss, and she knew from experience that Samuel would soon follow. She gently rocked them, humming softly, too preoccupied to notice when the cowboy emerged from the store and paused, watching her. "Excuse me, madam," came a deep voice. Olivia looked up, startled. The cowboy stood before her, hat in hand, revealing thick, dark hair. His eyes were a striking blue, clear as a mountain lake, and they regarded her with curiosity. "Yes," she replied warily. "Couldn't help but notice you sitting here with the little ones," he said. "Everything all right?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Peterson bustled out of the bakery and approached them. "Oh, Mr. Wade, good to see you back in town. This is Miss Taylor. She's in rather a difficult situation." The cowboy, Mr. Wade, nodded politely to Olivia. "Mason Wade, madam. I have a ranch about 10 miles west of town." "Olivia Taylor," she replied, shifting the twins as Sarah began to cry in earnest. Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice, though not enough that Olivia couldn't hear. "Her husband passed, left her with those twins. Nobody in town can take her in. We've offered to help her get to Denver to the orphanage, but she won't hear of it." Mason Wade's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Olivia and the babies. "Nobody wants the woman with twin babies?" he asked, his tone oddly quiet. "Well, it's not that we don't want to help, Mrs. Peterson said defensively, but what can she do with 2 infants? She can't work, can't. Good, Mason interrupted firmly, because I'm taking all 3 of you." A stunned silence fell over the small group. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "I beg your pardon." "My sister Emily passed last month," Mason said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of pain. "Consumption. She was supposed to come out here to keep house for me. I've got a good-sized place, plenty of room, and could use the help." He looked directly at Olivia. "You need somewhere to stay with your children. I need someone to cook and keep house. Seems we might be able to help each other." "Mr. Wade," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed, "you can't just—" "I believe I can," he said firmly. "Unless Miss Taylor objects." Olivia's mind raced. This offer seemed too convenient, too sudden. Yet what choice did she have? "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Wade?" "A business arrangement," he replied promptly. Room and board for you and your children, plus a small wage, in exchange for cooking and housekeeping. My ranch hands take their meals at the house, so there'd be plenty to do, but you'd have your own rooms, I should say, in privacy. And if it doesn't work out, she pressed, then I'll bring you back to town, or wherever you want to go, no questions asked. His gaze was steady, honest. I give you my word. This is highly irregular, Mrs. Peterson protested. So is leaving a woman and 2 babies with nowhere to go, Mason replied, not unkindly but with steel in his voice. Olivia studied him carefully. There was something solid about Mason Wade, a steadiness that reminded her of her father. Making a decision like this, trusting a stranger, went against everything she had been taught. But what alternative did she have? I accept your offer, Mr. Wade, she said finally. But I want to be clear that this is strictly a working arrangement. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Of course, Miss Taylor. He glanced at her trunk. Is this all you have? She nodded, and he picked up the trunk with ease, carrying it to his horse. I'll need to get a wagon from the livery for you and the little ones, and perhaps some supplies for the journey. Can you be ready to leave in an hour? Yes, she said simply. True to his word, Mason returned within the hour, driving a small wagon with a canvas cover to shield them from the sun. He helped Olivia up onto the seat, handling her as if she were made of fine china, careful not to disturb the sleeping twins. Her trunk was secured in the back, along with several parcels from the general store. As they pulled away from Clearwater Springs, Olivia caught sight of Mrs. Peterson and several other townspeople watching their departure with expressions ranging from disapproval to relief. She lifted her chin and faced forward. Whatever lay ahead at Mason Wade's ranch, it had to be better than the rejection she had found in town. The journey took several hours. Mason was quiet but not unfriendly, occasionally pointing out landmarks or asking if she needed to stop to tend to the babies. When they cried, he showed no annoyance, simply slowing the wagon to make the ride smoother. May I ask about your husband? He inquired as they crossed a small stream, the water splashing beneath the wagon wheels. Thomas was a schoolteacher, she replied, her throat tightening. We met when I was 18, married a year later. He took ill this past winter, pneumonia. She swallowed hard. The twins were born a month after he died. Mason nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. I'm sorry for your loss. It's not easy being alone. And you, Mr. Wade, have you always lived out here? Came west from Pennsylvania after the war, he said. Fought for the Union. Afterward, couldn't settle back into city life. Worked as a trail hand for a few years, saved my money, then bought this land 5 years ago. He glanced at her. It's a good piece of country, good water, good grazing, building up a fine herd of cattle. And you've been alone all this time. A shadow crossed his face. Had a foreman and his wife living in the house for a while. Good people. They moved on to Oregon last year. My sister Emily was supposed to join me, help run the household. He fell silent for a moment. Been managing with just the ranch hands since then, but it's not ideal. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the landscape opened up into a broad valley. A creek wound through the center, lined with cottonwoods, their leaves shimmering silver green in the late afternoon light. Nestled against a gentle rise sat a substantial 2-story house built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. A large barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush grass. That's Cottonwood Ranch, Mason said, a note of pride in his voice. Home. Olivia took in the scene with amazement. This was no humble homestead but a prosperous operation. The house alone was twice the size of the small cottage she had shared with Thomas. As they approached, several men emerged from one of the outbuildings, watching curiously. Mason raised a hand in greeting. "My ranch hands," he explained. "Good men, all of them. They'll keep their distance, give you time to settle in." He drew the wagon to a stop before the house and jumped down, coming around to help Olivia. As her feet touched the ground, the twins began to stir, as if sensing they had reached a destination. "Let me show you inside," Mason said, carrying her trunk up the porch steps. The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a massive cook stove, a dining room with a long table that could seat at least 12, a comfortable parlor with a stone fireplace, and what appeared to be an office. The furnishings were solid and of good quality, if somewhat sparse and masculine in taste. "Upstairs there are 4 bedrooms," Mason explained as he led her through the house. "Mine is at the end of the hall. I thought you might like the one with the adjoining sitting room for the babies." He opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed, a dresser, and a washstand. Heavy curtains framed windows that overlooked the valley. A door in one wall led to a smaller room, perfect for the twins. "This was to be my sister's room," Mason said quietly. "I think she'd be pleased to know it's being used by someone who needs it." Olivia was overwhelmed by the generosity of the arrangement. "Mr. Wade, this is too much. I'm just your housekeeper." "You're a mother with 2 children who needs a proper place to stay," he corrected gently. The room was sitting empty anyway. He showed her the rest of the upstairs, including the bathroom with its large copper tub, then brought her back downstairs to the kitchen. "I've had Mrs. Henderson from town send over some provisions to get you started," he said, indicating the well-stocked pantry. "The ranch hands usually have breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, and supper at sunset. There are 5 of them plus me." 6 men to cook for," Olivia mused, already calculating quantities and menus in her head. "I can manage that." "I don't expect you to start right away," Mason added. "Take a day or 2 to settle in. The men can fend for themselves a bit longer." "That's very kind, but I'd prefer to begin earning my keep immediately," Olivia replied. "Perhaps a simple supper tonight and then a proper breakfast in the morning." Mason studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you're certain, I'll have one of the men bring in more firewood and water." As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him, "Mr. Wade." He paused, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not everyone would have done this." A slight smile curved his lips. "Get some rest, Miss Taylor. I'll send Pete in with the wood and water shortly." Left alone with her sleeping twins, Olivia sank onto a kitchen chair, trying to process the dramatic turn her circumstances had taken in just a few hours. This morning, she had been facing destitution and the possible loss of her children. Now she was installed as housekeeper in a fine ranch house, with a decent wage and a secure roof over their heads. It seemed almost too good to be true, which made her wary. But Mason Wade had been nothing but respectful and straightforward. Perhaps, just this once, good fortune had found her. The twins began to wake, hungry after the long journey. As Olivia tended to them, she resolved to prove her worth to Mr. Wade. This chance was too precious to squander. By the time the sun set, Olivia had prepared a hearty supper of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, using the provisions Mason had purchased. The ranch hands filed in, 6 men of varying ages, all displaying the same awkward mix of curiosity and respect as they removed their hats and washed up at the pump outside before entering the kitchen. Mason made brief introductions. Pete, the oldest at around 50 with grizzled gray hair, the Rodriguez brothers, Carlos and Miguel, skilled horsemen from Mexico, young Billy, barely 20 and eager to please, and Frank, the taciturn foreman whose weathered face revealed little. They ate with the hearty appetite of men who worked hard from sunrise to sunset, complimenting her cooking with genuine appreciation. The twins remained upstairs, having been fed and settled for what Olivia hoped would be a few hours of sleep. "This is a far sight better than what we've been eating," Frank commented, reaching for a second helping of cornbread. "Miss Taylor will be taking over the housekeeping duties," Mason explained. "I expect you all to show her the same respect you'd show your own mothers or sisters." The men nodded solemnly, though young Billy blushed to the roots of his hair when Olivia smiled at him. "Any of you give the lady trouble, you'll answer to me," Mason added, his tone light but with an unmistakable edge of authority. After the meal, the men thanked her politely and filed out to the bunkhouse, leaving Mason and Olivia alone in the kitchen. "That was excellent," he said, helping her clear the table despite her protests. "The men haven't eaten this well since Mrs. Jenkins left for Oregon." "I'm glad it met with approval," she replied, rolling up her sleeves to wash the dishes. "Though I'll need to bake bread tomorrow, and perhaps you could tell me where I might find a garden. Fresh vegetables would be a welcome addition." "There's a kitchen garden behind the house," Mason said. "It's been neglected this spring, but the soil is good if you've a mind to tend it." "I would like that," Olivia said, realizing how much she had missed having earth beneath her fingers. From upstairs came the unmistakable wail of a hungry baby. Olivia immediately dried her hands on her apron. "Go on," Mason said. "I can finish up here." "That's not necessary. It's one stack of dishes, Miss Taylor. I believe I can manage without breaking anything valuable." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, transforming his serious face. Olivia hurried upstairs to find both twins awake and hungry. She settled on the bed to feed them, marveling at how quickly life could change. Just that morning, she had been at her lowest point, facing rejection and the possible separation from her beloved babies. Now she was established in a comfortable home with meaningful work and a kind employer. She refused to let herself think beyond the present arrangement. Mason Wade was her employer, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome in a rugged way, with those striking blue eyes and an unexpected gentleness toward her children, was irrelevant. She had loved Thomas deeply and lost him cruelly. Her heart was not ready for anything but healing. Yet as she drifted off to sleep that night, in a bed more comfortable than any she had known since leaving her parents' home, Olivia couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, fortune had finally turned in her favor. The next few weeks established a routine at Cottonwood Ranch. Olivia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, who arrived as the first light touched the eastern sky. They ate quickly and with appreciation, then headed out to their daily tasks. Mason typically joined them, though he took time to inquire after her comfort and whether she needed anything from town. The twins thrived in the clean mountain air. Olivia set up a small area for them in the kitchen where she could keep an eye on them while working, and on pleasant days, she brought them onto the porch in a cradle Mason had fashioned from an old wooden crate, padded with soft blankets. To her surprise, the ranch hands took a shine to the babies. Gruff old Pete would make funny faces to make them smile, and even taciturn Frank would pause to wiggle a finger at them when he thought no one was watching. Young Billy proved especially helpful, often offering to rock the cradle while Olivia kneaded bread or prepared vegetables from the garden she was gradually bringing back to life. Mason, however, maintained a certain distance. He was unfailingly polite and considerate, ensuring she had everything she needed, but he rarely lingered in conversation and seemed almost uncomfortable when she caught him watching her with the twins. Olivia tried not to let this bother her. After all, their arrangement was professional, not personal. If he chose to keep his own counsel, that was his right. One evening in late July, about a month after her arrival at Cottonwood Ranch, Olivia was sitting on the porch shelling peas while the twins napped in their cradle beside her. The ranch hands had finished supper and returned to the bunkhouse, and the golden light of sunset bathed the valley in a warm glow. The creak of a floorboard alerted her to Mason's presence. He stood in the doorway, hesitating, as if uncertain of his welcome. "Would you care to join me, Mr. Wade?" Olivia asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "It's a lovely evening." He nodded and settled into the chair, stretching his long legs out before him. He had cleaned up after the day's work, his dark hair still damp from washing, and he wore a fresh shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. "The garden's coming along nicely," he commented, nodding toward the neat rows of vegetables visible at the side of the house. "Yes, the soil here is excellent," Olivia replied. "I'm hoping for a good crop of tomatoes and corn before the first frost." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the soft rustling of pea pods and the distant lowing of cattle. "You've made quite a difference around here," Mason said finally, his voice low to avoid waking the babies. "The house hasn't felt this much like a home since, well, ever, I suppose." Olivia felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "I'm glad. It's a beautiful home." "It deserves to be properly cared for." Mason's gaze shifted to the sleeping twins. "They're growing fast." "Too fast," Olivia agreed with a smile. "Samuel is trying to roll over now. Sarah watches him, determined to do it first." "They seem happy," he observed. "You're a good mother." The simple compliment touched her deeply. "Thank you. I try to be. It's not easy sometimes, knowing they'll never know their father." Mason nodded, his expression thoughtful. "My own father died when I was 12. I still remember him, but my younger sister, Emily, she was only 4. She grew up with just stories of him." "I'm sorry about your sister," Olivia said softly. "You must miss her." "I do." His voice was tight with controlled emotion. "We wrote regularly, but I hadn't seen her in 3 years. Always thought there'd be time." He shook his head. "That's the thing about life. You never know how much time you have." Impulsively, Olivia reached out and touched his hand. "I understand. After Thomas died, I kept thinking of all the things I wished we'd done, places we'd talked about visiting." Mason turned his hand over, briefly squeezing her fingers before releasing them. "Life's filled with regrets if we let it be. Better to look forward." He stood, seemingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "It's getting cool. You should bring the little ones inside soon." "Yes, of course," Olivia agreed, wondering at his sudden withdrawal. "Good night, Mr. Wade." "Mason," he said abruptly. "You've been here a month now. I think you could call me Mason." A small smile curved her lips. "And you should call me Olivia." He nodded, a hint of an answering smile on his face. "Good night, Olivia." As he disappeared into the house, Olivia felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since the early days of her courtship with Thomas. Quickly, she pushed the feeling aside. Mason Wade was her employer, her benefactor. Nothing more. But as she gathered the sleeping twins and carried them inside, she couldn't help wondering if perhaps there might be room in her heart for something more than grief, after all. The following week brought a change to the peaceful routine of Cottonwood Ranch. A telegram arrived from Denver, summoning Mason to an important meeting with cattle buyers. He would need to be away for at least a week, possibly longer. "Frank will oversee the ranch while I'm gone," Mason explained as Olivia packed provisions for his journey. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask him." "We'll be fine," Olivia assured him, wrapping biscuits and cheese in a clean cloth. The men know their duties, and the twins and I can manage quite well. Mason frowned slightly, his brow creasing with concern. I don't like leaving you alone out here. If you'd prefer to stay in town until I return, this is my home now, Olivia interrupted gently. At least for the time being. We'll be perfectly safe with the ranch hands nearby. A curious expression crossed Mason's face at her words, something between pleasure and uncertainty. Very well, but I'll try to return as quickly as possible. The morning of his departure, Olivia rose even earlier than usual to prepare a hearty breakfast. Mason ate quickly, his saddlebags already packed and waiting by the door. As he prepared to leave, he paused beside the twins, who were awake and gurgling on a blanket Olivia had spread near the stove. To her surprise, he knelt down and touched each baby gently on the head. "You two be good for your mama," he said softly. "I'll be back before you know it." Standing, he turned to Olivia. "Take care of yourself," he said, his blue eyes serious. "And them." "We'll be here when you return," she promised. He nodded once, settled his hat on his head, and strode out to where his horse waited. Olivia stood on the porch, the twins in her arms, and watched until he disappeared down the trail toward town. The first few days of Mason's absence passed uneventfully. The ranch hands continued their work, coming in for meals as usual, though Olivia noticed they were particularly careful about wiping their boots and washing up before entering the house. Frank reported daily on the ranch operations, clearly taking his responsibilities seriously. On the fourth day, storm clouds began gathering over the mountains to the west. By afternoon, the sky had darkened ominously, and a sharp wind whipped through the valley, bending the cottonwoods along the creek. "Looks like a bad one coming," Pete commented as the men gathered for supper. "Might want to bring in extra wood and water, Miss Taylor. Sometimes these mountain storms can last a day or two." Olivia nodded, glancing worriedly at the windows as the first fat raindrops began to pelt against the glass. "Do you think Mr. Wade will try to travel in this weather?" "Not if he's got any sense," Frank replied, his weathered face grim. "That trail gets treacherous in heavy rain. Likely he'll wait it out in Denver." By nightfall, the storm had intensified into a raging tempest. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged white forks. The twins, disturbed by the noise, were fretful and difficult to settle. Olivia walked the floor with them, singing softly, until finally they drifted into an uneasy sleep. She had just laid them in their cradle when a pounding on the front door startled her. Hurrying downstairs, she found Frank on the porch, rain streaming from his oilskin coat. "Creek's rising fast, Miss Taylor," he said without preamble. "We're moving the horses to higher ground. You should know that the bridge might wash out if this keeps up." "The bridge," Olivia repeated, alarmed. "But that's the only way across the creek from town," Frank nodded grimly. "Don't worry yourself. The house is on high ground, you'll be safe here. But if the bridge goes, we could be cut off for a few days until the water recedes enough to ford." "I understand," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Just stay inside with the little ones," Frank advised. "We'll handle the stock." As he disappeared back into the stormy darkness, Olivia closed the door, trying to suppress a shiver of apprehension. She had never experienced a severe storm in the mountains before. The wind howled around the eaves of the house, and the rain beat against the windows with almost malevolent force. Upstairs, the twins began to cry again. Olivia hurried to them, gathering them close and whispering reassurances. "It's all right, my darlings, just a storm. We're safe here." She hoped she was telling them the truth. The storm raged throughout the night. Olivia dozed fitfully, waking at each particularly loud crash of thunder. By dawn, the rain had slackened somewhat, but the wind still moaned around the house. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to start breakfast, expecting the ranch hands to arrive as usual despite the weather. But as the minutes ticked by and no one appeared, she grew concerned. Perhaps they were busy with storm damage and hadn't time for a proper meal. She wrapped some bread and cold meat in a cloth and pulled on a heavy shawl, intending to take the food to the bunkhouse. The moment she stepped outside, she understood why no one had come. The peaceful creek that wound through the valley had transformed into a raging torrent, brown and angry, swollen to 3 times its normal width. The bridge that connected the ranch to the town road was completely submerged, with only the tops of the railings visible above the churning water. Worse, the floodwaters had reached the bunkhouse. Olivia could see the ranch hands working frantically to move supplies to higher ground, the water already lapping at the foundations of the building. Frank spotted her and waded through knee-deep water to reach the rise where the main house stood. "You shouldn't be out here, Miss Taylor," he called over the howl of the wind. "I was worried when no one came for breakfast," she explained, handing him the bundle of food. "Is everyone all right?" "We're fine," he assured her. "Lost some fencing and the bunkhouse is taking on water, but we've moved what we could. The barn's on higher ground, so the horses are safe." "What about the bridge?" she asked, though she could see the answer with her own eyes. Frank's expression was grim. "Gone, most likely. Won't know until the water goes down." He glanced back at the struggling men. "I'd better get back. You stay in the house. This rise has never flooded, even in the worst storms." Olivia returned to the house, her mind racing. With the bridge out, they were effectively isolated. If anything happened, if the twins became ill, or if the floodwaters rose further, there would be no way to summon help or escape to town. For the first time since arriving at Cottonwood Ranch, she felt truly vulnerable. And for the first time since his departure, she found herself desperately wishing for Mason's return. But Mason was in Denver, safely away from the flooding, she reminded herself. It was better that way. He wouldn't risk traveling in such conditions. All she could do was wait out the storm and pray for the waters to recede quickly. By midday, the rain had stopped entirely, though the creek continued to surge with runoff from the mountains. The ranch hands had abandoned the flooded bunkhouse and moved their belongings to the barn. Frank came to the house to report on the situation. "We've lost the vegetable garden," he said apologetically. "Water came up and washed it out. I know you put a lot of work into it." Olivia sighed but squared her shoulders. "Gardens can be replanted. I'm just glad everyone is safe." "Boss ain't going to be happy about the bridge," Frank continued. "That's the second time in 10 years it's washed out. He was talking about building a new one higher up after the last flood." "When do you think the water will go down enough to cross?" Frank scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Hard to say. If the rain holds off, maybe 2-3 days. If it starts again," he shrugged, "could be a week or more." That evening, as Olivia prepared supper for herself and the twins, a commotion outside drew her attention. She heard voices raised in surprise, then the sound of running footsteps on the porch. A moment later, the door burst open and Frank stood there, his usually stoic face animated with excitement. "It's the boss," he exclaimed, "coming down the north trail." Olivia rushed to the window, her heart suddenly racing. The north trail was a rarely used path that wound through the mountains, avoiding the creek crossing entirely. It was longer and more difficult than the main trail, but passable in emergencies. Sure enough, a lone rider was descending the steep trail, his horse picking its way carefully down the rocky slope. Even at a distance, Olivia recognized Mason's broad-shouldered figure and the distinctive gait of his bay gelding. He must have heard about the storm and taken the mountain route, Frank said, watching with obvious relief. Smart thinking. Olivia felt a flood of emotions she wasn't prepared for: relief, joy, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Thank goodness he's safe," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. She returned to the kitchen, suddenly anxious to have a hot meal ready for Mason's arrival. She added more potatoes to the stew already simmering on the stove and set about mixing biscuits, her hands working quickly as her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quite suppress. By the time hoofbeats announced Mason's arrival in the yard, Olivia had composed herself. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch as he dismounted, looking exhausted but whole. His eyes found hers immediately. "You're safe," he said, the relief in his voice unmistakable. "We're all fine," she assured him. The house wasn't touched by the flooding. He handed his horse's reins to Pete, who had hurried over to assist, then took the porch steps 2 at a time. Before Olivia quite knew what was happening, Mason had pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. "When I heard about the storm, all I could think about was getting back here," he said, releasing her almost as quickly as he had grabbed her, an embarrassed flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "Frank, the men, everyone's accounted for. All safe, boss," Frank confirmed. "Bunkhouse took some water and we lost some fencing, but the stock is fine. Bridge is gone, though." Mason nodded grimly. "Figured as much when I came over the North Pass, saw the creek from up there." He turned to Olivia. "The twins?" "Sleeping," she said softly, touched by his concern. "They were restless during the storm, but settled down once it passed." "Good." He ran a hand through his hair, which was damp with sweat from the difficult ride. "I need to check the damage, talk to the men about repairs." "Supper will be ready in half an hour," Olivia said. "You look like you could use a hot meal." A tired smile touched his lips. "That sounds like heaven right now." As he turned to follow Frank to survey the flood damage, Olivia returned to the kitchen, her heart still fluttering oddly in her chest. The brief embrace had lasted only seconds, but the feeling of Mason's strong arms around her lingered, unsettling and yet somehow right. She tried to push the thoughts away. Mason had embraced her out of relief, nothing more. She was his housekeeper, the mother of the children he had taken under his protection. If there was affection in the gesture, it was the same kind he might show to any member of his household in a moment of crisis. Yet as she prepared the evening meal, she couldn't help but recall the way his eyes had sought hers first, before anything else. As if her safety and that of the twins was his primary concern. When Mason returned for supper, he had washed and changed into clean clothes. The lines of exhaustion on his face were still evident, but some of the tension had eased from his shoulders. He sat at the table while Olivia served the stew and fresh biscuits. "The men told me how you handled everything during the storm," he said as she joined him at the table. "Frank says you were calm and collected, even when the water was rising." Olivia smiled wryly. "I was terrified, actually, but panic wouldn't have helped the situation." "That's courage," Mason replied, his blue eyes warm with admiration. "Being afraid but doing what needs to be done anyway." The conversation turned to the damage from the flood and plans for rebuilding. The bridge would need to be completely replaced, and Mason was determined to build it higher and stronger this time. The bunkhouse would require repairs, and parts of the fencing along the creek would have to be rebuilt once the water receded further. "It's a setback," he admitted, "but nothing that can't be fixed. The important thing is that everyone is safe." After the meal, as Olivia cleared the dishes, Mason lingered at the table, seemingly reluctant to end the evening. "I brought something back from Denver," he said finally. "For the twins." Surprised, Olivia turned from the wash basin. "You did?" Mason nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "There was a shop near the hotel. They had these. He reached into his pocket and withdrew two small carved wooden horses, one painted bay, the other dappled gray. I know they're too young for toys yet, but I thought, for when they're older. Olivia took the tiny carvings, deeply touched by the gesture. They're beautiful, Mason. Thank you. There's something else, he continued, reaching into his coat pocket. He produced a small paper-wrapped package and handed it to her. This is for you. Olivia carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a flower, with a small pearl at its center. Oh, she breathed, running a finger over the fine craftsmanship. It's lovely. I saw it and thought of you, Mason said simply. It seemed like something you might like. Olivia looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth in his blue eyes as they met hers. Thank you, she said softly. I've never received such a thoughtful gift. For a moment, neither moved. Olivia could feel her heart beating rapidly, could see Mason's gaze drop briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. Then, from upstairs, came the unmistakable cry of one of the twins waking. The moment broken, Olivia stepped back. I should go to them. Mason nodded, clearing his throat. Of course. Good night, Olivia. Good night, Mason. She clutched the brooch in one hand as she hurried upstairs, her thoughts in turmoil. As the summer progressed into early autumn, life at Cottonwood Ranch settled into a new rhythm. The flood damage was gradually repaired, and a new, stronger bridge spanned the creek where the old one had been washed away. The bunkhouse was dried out and reinforced, and Olivia replanted her garden with late-season vegetables. The twins continued to thrive, growing more active and alert each day. Samuel had indeed been the first to roll over, but Sarah quickly mastered the skill as well, and now both were attempting to sit up unassisted. Their little personalities were emerging, Samuel curious and determined, Sarah watchful and thoughtful. Mason spent more time at the house than before his trip to Denver. He often joined Olivia on the porch in the evenings after the twins were asleep, sometimes bringing ranch accounts to review, other times simply sitting in companionable silence as twilight deepened over the valley. Occasionally, they would talk late into the night, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their losses. Olivia learned that Mason had fought at Gettysburg, had seen friends die, had nearly died himself from a bullet wound that still troubled him on cold mornings. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of building something that would last, something he could be proud of. In turn, she told him of growing up in Ohio, the daughter of a doctor, of her love of books and learning, of meeting Thomas at a church social and knowing immediately that he was the one she wanted to spend her life with. She spoke of her grief when he fell ill, of her fear when she realized she would be raising their children alone. "You're not alone now," Mason said one evening as they watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Olivia knew that her feelings for Mason had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. Yet she hesitated to acknowledge them, even to herself. It seemed too soon, somehow disloyal to Thomas's memory. And Mason, for all his kindness and growing affection for the twins, had never spoken of anything beyond their current arrangement. Perhaps he saw her only as a convenient housekeeper, a woman in need of his protection but not his heart. The situation came to a head in late September, as the aspen leaves turned gold on the mountainsides and the air held the crisp promise of winter. A traveling preacher was visiting Clearwater Springs, and Mason suggested they attend the Sunday service. "It would be good for the twins to be christened," he said casually over breakfast. "If you'd like that, of course." Olivia was surprised by the suggestion but pleased. "I would like that very much, but I need to ask someone to stand as godfather." "I'd be honored," Mason replied immediately, then seemed to realize how presumptuous this might sound. "That is, if you'd consider me. I know I'm not family, but you've been more than family to us, Mason," Olivia interrupted softly. "There's no one I'd rather ask." The smile that lit his face warmed her to her core. "Then it's settled. We'll go to town on Sunday." The day of the christening dawned clear and cool. Olivia dressed the twins in the finest clothes she had for them, gowns she had painstakingly sewn from fabric Mason had brought back from Denver. She herself wore her best dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes, with Mason's silver brooch pinned at her throat. Mason had arranged for the ranch wagon, cleaned and polished for the occasion, with a fresh layer of straw covered by blankets to keep the twins comfortable. He himself was almost unrecognizable in a well-tailored suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. Olivia thought he had never looked so handsome. The small church in Clearwater Springs was filled to capacity when they arrived. Olivia was conscious of the curious stares and whispers as Mason helped her down from the wagon, carrying Samuel while she held Sarah. They made a picture that could not be missed: a handsome man, a young woman, and two babies, arriving together as a family might. Mrs. Peterson hurried over as they entered the church, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Miss Taylor, how wonderful to see you, and the babies, my goodness, how they've grown." "They're doing very well," Olivia replied politely. "We've come for the christening." Reverend Davis agreed to perform it after the service. "A christening, how lovely." Mrs. Peterson's gaze darted between Olivia and Mason, clearly burning with unasked questions. "And Mr. Wade is?" "Standing as godfather," Mason supplied smoothly, his hand coming to rest lightly on Olivia's back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The service proceeded without incident, though Olivia was acutely aware of the speculation their presence had generated. The twins behaved remarkably well, quiet and alert in the unfamiliar surroundings. After the regular service concluded, most of the congregation lingered for the christening ceremony. Reverend Davis, a kindly older man with white hair and gentle eyes, welcomed them to the front of the church. "We gather today to welcome these children into God's family," he announced. Samuel Thomas Taylor and Sarah Emily Taylor, brought by their mother, Olivia Taylor, and their godfather, Mason Wade. As the Reverend sprinkled holy water on each child's forehead, pronouncing the ancient words of blessing, Olivia felt a profound sense of rightness. The twins might have lost their father, but they were surrounded by love and protection nonetheless. After the ceremony, many of the townspeople approached to congratulate them and admire the twins. Some, like Mrs. Peterson, were the same people who had been so quick to suggest Olivia give up her babies just a few months ago. Now they cooed and fussed over the children as if they had always supported Olivia's determination to keep them. "My, they're thriving out at that ranch," observed Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife. "You must be doing something right, Mr. Wade." "Miss Taylor deserves the credit," Mason replied firmly. "She's an excellent mother." As they prepared to leave, Reverend Davis took Olivia aside. "Your children are beautiful, my dear, and Mr. Wade seems very fond of them and of you." Olivia felt herself blush. "He's been very kind to us." The Reverend's eyes twinkled. "Kindness is a fine foundation, but I suspect there may be something more growing there, if you'll forgive an old man's observation." Before Olivia could respond, Mason appeared at her side. "We should start back before the little ones get too tired," he suggested, his hand again finding the small of her back. The journey home was quiet, the twins sleeping peacefully in their nest of blankets. Olivia's mind was full of the day's events and the Reverend's parting words. "That went well, I thought," Mason commented as they neared the ranch. Yes, it did, Olivia agreed. Thank you for suggesting it. It means a great deal to me that the twins have been properly christened. Mason was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. Olivia, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, her heart quickened. Yes. I received another offer from those cattle buyers in Denver. They want me to come back next month to finalize a deal. He hesitated. It would mean another week away at least. Olivia tried to hide her disappointment. This wasn't what she had hoped he might want to discuss. I see. Well, we managed well enough last time, despite the flood. That's just it, Mason said, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. I don't like leaving you and the twins alone. Every time I go away, all I can think about is getting back to you. He pulled the wagon to a stop at the top of the rise overlooking the ranch. The afternoon sun gilded the valley, the newly rebuilt bridge gleaming white over the now peaceful creek, the house below them solid and welcoming. Mason turned to face her. Olivia, I'm not saying this right. What I'm trying to tell you is that I care for you, more than I thought possible after everything. The war, losing Emily, being alone out here for so long. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Mason, please, let me finish, he said, taking her hands in his. When I first brought you here, it was because I couldn't bear to see you and the twins with nowhere to go. I thought it would be a simple arrangement, you keeping house, me providing shelter, but it's become so much more than that. His blue eyes held hers, earnest and vulnerable. I love those babies as if they were my own, and I love you, Olivia. I know it might be too soon after losing your husband, and I'll understand if you don't feel the same way, but I needed you to know. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. Oh, Mason. She squeezed his hands tightly. It's not too soon. Thomas will always have a place in my heart as the twins' father and as my first love, but my heart has room for more love, for you. Mason's face lit with hope. Are you saying, I love you too? Olivia said simply. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid of what it might mean for our arrangement for the future. But I can't deny it any longer. With infinite tenderness, Mason leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and new beginnings. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he whispered. Be my wife. Let me be a father to the twins, a husband to you. Let's make Cottonwood Ranch our home together. Olivia's heart soared. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. From the back of the wagon came a soft cooing sound as one of the twins stirred. Mason and Olivia turned to look at the babies, now awake and watching them with bright, curious eyes. I think they approve, Mason said with a smile, reaching back to touch each small head gently. They know what I've known for some time now, Olivia replied, that you were meant to be part of our family. Mason gathered the reins and clicked to the horses. Let's go home, he said, the simple phrase now carrying the weight of all their shared hopes and dreams. As the wagon rolled down the slope toward Cottonwood Ranch, Olivia marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief and rejection to the heights of new love and acceptance, all because one man had looked at a woman with twin babies whom nobody wanted and said, "Good, because I'm taking all three of you." Reverend Davis married them on a golden October afternoon, with the twins, now nearly 8 months old, watching solemnly from Mrs. Henderson's arms. The small church in Clearwater Springs was decorated with autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers gathered by the ranch hands, who stood proudly in their Sunday best as witnesses. Olivia wore a new dress of ivory silk that Mason had ordered from Denver, with her silver flower brooch pinned over her heart. Mason, resplendent in a new suit, could not take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle to join him at the altar. Dearly beloved, Reverend Davis began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in the bonds of holy matrimony." As they exchanged their vows, Olivia thought of how far they had come in such a short time. When Mason placed the simple gold band on her finger, she felt as if her life had come full circle from happiness to despair and back to happiness again, deeper and more profound for having known loss. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Davis declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Mason's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all the years to come. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Mason Wade, Olivia saw nothing but joy and approval on the faces surrounding them, even from those who had once suggested she give up her children. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and a feast prepared by the women of the town, led by Mrs. Henderson. The twins were passed from arms to arms, admired and fussed over by everyone, but they reserved their brightest smiles for Mason, reaching for him whenever he came near. "They know their pa when they see him," Pete observed, his gruff voice suspiciously thick with emotion. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Mason found Olivia sitting on the porch watching the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked, settling beside her and taking her hand. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "A few months ago I had lost hope. Now I have everything I could wish for: a loving husband, healthy children, a beautiful home." Mason's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I was thinking about that day I found you in town. Nobody wanted the woman with twin babies." His voice hardened slightly at the memory. "Their loss, my gain." "Our gain," Olivia corrected, gesturing toward the twins who were being entertained by young Billy's attempts at juggling apples. "They have a father who loves them, a home where they will grow up safe and cherished. And maybe someday, brothers and sisters," Mason added, his eyes warm with promise. Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'd like that very much." As twilight deepened into night and the celebration wound down, the guests departed with final congratulations and well wishes. The twins, exhausted from the excitement, fell asleep in their cradle upstairs. Olivia and Mason stood on the porch, his arm around her waist, watching the last wagon disappear down the road toward town. "Alone at last," Mason murmured, turning to his bride with a smile that made her heart race. "Not alone," Olivia corrected, looking up at the man who had saved her and her children, who had opened his home and his heart to them. "Never alone again." And as Mason's lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. The years that followed brought all the joy and challenges that life on a frontier ranch entailed. Cottonwood Ranch prospered under Mason's careful management, the herd growing, the land expanding as he purchased adjoining properties. The house expanded too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family, for grow it did. The spring after their wedding brought the birth of their first child together, a son they named James Thomas Wade, honoring both Mason's father and Olivia's first husband. 2 years later, a daughter, Elizabeth Emily, joined the family, her name a tribute to both their mothers. The twins, Samuel and Sarah, grew into sturdy, confident children who never doubted their place in the family. Though Mason was not their birth father, he loved them as deeply as his biological children, and they returned that love in full measure. By the time they were old enough to understand, they knew the story of how their mother and Mason had found each other, how he had claimed all 3 of them when no one else would. "That was the best decision I ever made," Mason would tell them, his arm around Olivia's shoulders, the silver in his dark hair catching the firelight as they gathered in the parlor on winter evenings. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Olivia with a gift, the deed to Cottonwood Ranch, with all 4 children named as equal heirs. "This is their legacy," he explained as they sat on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel and Sarah were now approaching 11, James was 9, and Elizabeth 7. "Yours and mine together." Olivia, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their 5th child grew, leaned against her husband's solid strength. "When I came here with the twins, I was just hoping for shelter until I could make my own way. I never dreamed I'd find everything I ever wanted." Mason kissed her temple gently. "I was a lonely man with a big empty house before you came. You and the twins brought life and love back into my world." "I'm the fortunate one, Olivia." From the yard came the sound of childish laughter as the 4 children engaged in an impromptu race, Sarah in the lead, her long dark braids flying behind her, Samuel and James neck and neck, with little Elizabeth determinedly bringing up the rear. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in town that day?" Olivia asked. "If our paths hadn't crossed?" Mason was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said finally. "I was meant to find you and the twins. We were meant to build this life together." As the golden light of the setting sun bathed Cottonwood Ranch in a warm glow, Olivia thought of how close she had come to giving up that day in Clearwater Springs. How the rejection and disapproval of others had nearly broken her spirit. And how one man's simple declaration, "I'm taking all 3 of you," had changed the course of her life forever. "I believe you're right," she said softly. "Some things are meant to be." And as Mason's arm tightened around her shoulders, as their children's laughter floated up from the yard like music on the evening breeze, Olivia Wade knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, at last and forever, surrounded by the family that love had built.